Thanks for everything, the CEO said with that plastic smile. You're no longer needed. I just looked at him, stood up from the conference room chair and replied calmly, Good luck with the system launch tomorrow. My name is Dylan Cole. I'm 42 years old and spent the last 7 years working at Altavance Systems, a tech company where most employees remain nameless, even when they're the ones carrying the business on their backs. I was a machine learning engineer, the kind who likes clean code, strong coffee, and silence. I built the core of the company's most ambitious AI system from scratch, spent countless nights writing every line myself, what Richard Lane once called the project of the decade. Richard Lane, the CEO, 58, perfectly tailored blazer, smooth talker, the kind of guy who turns every meeting into a performance. Since the day he arrived, he sold himself as a visionary leader, but in reality, he climbed the ladder using other people's work. He never really understood how the system worked, but he understood one thing. It made a great showcase. I was just the quiet tech guy, and quiet guys are the easiest to erase. When he pulled me from the project, he said the technical phase was complete, that it was now time for executive leadership. According to him, the system would launch under his direction. That afternoon, they moved me into a small, isolated office. No team, no project, no access to the code. No one from my old team reached out. No one looked me in the eye. It was like I had died. What no one at that company knew was that I always coded with security in mind, including protection against internal theft. The betrayal didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It arrived clean-cut in a suit during a routine meeting. We were on the executive floor, where the air felt more filtered and the words more rehearsed. Richard kicked off the company board presentation with a polished line. Today, we're unveiling a revolution to the market, our proprietary AI, fully developed in-house. I was sitting in the back of the room like an accidental spectator. No introduction, no mention of my name. I watched slides filled with diagrams I had personally drawn months ago. Architecture decisions, self-learning layers, the adaptive refactoring algorithm. Every piece carried my invisible technical signature, but through Richard's voice, it all sounded like his own brilliance and the work of his new team, assembled just 4 weeks before the big reveal. Outside the room, I ran into Kyle, one of the engineers who had worked with me early in the project. I'm sorry, man, this is messed up. He couldn't hold eye contact for more than 2 seconds. He knew I'd put in nights, weekends, holidays, that while most people shut their laptops at 6, I stayed up coding into the early morning, not because I had to, but because I believed in what we were building. And now he saw me standing there, on the sidelines, while the company sold off what I had built, repackaged as a collective achievement led by Richard. I was officially removed from the project 3 days later. A cold HR email informed me I was being reassigned to a technical support office, a role completely disconnected from the core development. Strategic transition, they called it. They gave me a new laptop, one without access to the central repository. My commit account was deactivated. My badge, which once granted access to every floor, now opened just 2 doors. Richard never spoke to me, never offered an explanation. In the hallways, he told people the project needed someone with a leadership profile, and the board, of course, approved. A decision made in a meeting I wasn't even invited to. The most ironic part? My reassignment happened just 1 week after we had our first successful internal client tests with the AI, a major milestone for the company. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was spending my days in a cramped room, surrounded by boxes of outdated equipment and forgotten paperwork. I worked at Altavance for 7 years, always kept a low profile, always focused, never asked for a promotion. I just wanted to build something that worked, something that made sense. But in that moment, I understood. I was never really part of the company. I was just a tool, useful until someone more presentable could take the spotlight. I started doing something I hadn't done in a long time, printing everything I had saved, drafts, emails, screenshots from meetings, technical documents with timestamps, commit logs. And there, buried in old folders, I found what I needed. The file containing the security protocol I wrote during the first few months of the project. A single line of code, simple, invisible, but it quietly validated the identity of whoever was leading the system's execution. If the right parameters weren't present, if the name of the original architect had been removed, the system would begin to unlearn over time. It wouldn't destroy anything. It wouldn't cause damage. It would simply become ineffective. It was a precaution, an ethical safeguard. I never thought I'd actually need it. But now it was there, waiting, active, calm, lethal. The system was scheduled to launch on Monday, and I didn't have to do anything, just wait. On Monday, I got to the office earlier than usual. It was still dark outside when my badge unlocked the access door. Even the coffee in the break room felt lukewarm, like it somehow knew the day had no taste. I sat in my new office, or storage room, as they jokingly called it, behind closed doors. From where I was, I could barely hear the hum of the product team upstairs. The same team that just a month ago used to follow my lead. I wasn't part of anything anymore. No meetings, no mentions. I'd become a ghost employee in a company I had helped build, with an idea no one had the guts to take on at first. I spent 2 years on that project because I believed we could build something useful, something clean, elegant, a system that didn't just perform, it anticipated, it learned, it evolved, something that could shift the company's trajectory and show the market what we were truly capable of. But now, it was all about image. Richard and his marketing crew had turned the launch into a full-blown production. Strategic clients, board members, investors, everyone gathered to witness the masterpiece he claimed to have led. What they didn't know was that the AI system they were about to see had a hidden detail. It only worked under a specific identity, the identity of its real creator. And according to the current company records, that creator no longer existed. I spent the entire day reviewing an old spreadsheet just to pass the hours. Time moved slowly, like sand falling through thick glass. No one called me. No one asked how I was doing. A few support staff walked by in the hallway, eyes downcast, like my presence made them uncomfortable, like I'd done something wrong, but I hadn't. I built. They stole. Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard applause coming from the main auditorium. It was time. The system was being unveiled. I took a long breath. It felt like I was betraying something inside me. I'm not a vengeful man, but this wasn't revenge. It was correction. Minutes later, I got the first message on my phone. It was from Kyle. System froze during the second segment. Black screen. Logs are going crazy. Clients here. Richard's freaking out. I exhaled. I didn't reply. The protocol didn't delete anything. It didn't crash the system. It simply began to scramble the adaptive logic layer when it detected unauthorized use of the original author's credentials. It was like an ethical lock, a gatekeeper of integrity, and it worked, better than I ever expected. By the end of the day, I heard rushed footsteps in the hallway, voices. Word was spreading that the client had left the event before the coffee break. The system, they said, had started giving inconsistent answers, like it had reverted to a beta version. Richard was seen heading upstairs with 2 directors for an emergency meeting. Red-faced, tense, the kind of tension that only shows up when the curtain starts falling in front of an audience. A board executive was there too. You almost never saw anyone from the board at the office on a Monday afternoon. But then again, this wasn't a normal Monday. I closed the spreadsheet, grabbed my backpack, walked down the hallway without looking at anyone. Outside, the sky had turned a deep purple, like it was holding back rain. The kind of sky a city gets right before something changes. On Tuesday, there would be a meeting with legal, but not with Richard, with me. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find a notification in my inbox. Meeting scheduled, legal department, room 12B, 10 a.m. No subject, no explanation. But I knew exactly what it was about. The building was quieter than usual. It wasn't a holiday, but it felt like one. People walked slower through the halls like they were afraid to make too much noise. Some looked at me with curiosity. Others avoided eye contact altogether. By now, rumors had already started spreading about what happened during the presentation. The AI hadn't just failed, it had unraveled in real time, as if it had lost consciousness. I isolated myself in the small room where I now spent my days. A storage room, really. Shelves of outdated parts, stacked servers, disconnected cables. But it had become my refuge. I unlocked the drawer where I kept my personal copy of the project's original documentation. Everything was printed. I've always been that way. Old habit. Dated versions, commit screenshots, flowcharts with my signature, even handwritten notes with early ideas that later became core parts of the system. I opened one of the notebooks. In the margin of a page was a scribbled piece of the security code I had written early in development, an idea that came to me in the middle of the night after a particularly frustrating meeting with Richard. He had wanted to speed up the timeline and cut back on integrity testing, said, "The market doesn't wait." That bothered me. That night, I wrote the protocol, a kind of moral safeguard. If the system detected tampering with authorship or leadership metadata, it would begin a silent regression, a defensive behavior, reversible, but enough to stall the product if someone tried to claim ownership of what wasn't theirs. I never intended to use it. I just wanted to protect the work. It was a layer of ethics, built where the hallways lacked it. At exactly 10 a.m., I stepped into room 12B. Inside were two company lawyers, the director of compliance, and unexpectedly someone from the board, Catherine Reese, the only board member I actually respected. We'd only crossed paths a few times, but during open meetings, she always asked technical questions. You could tell it wasn't just for show. She got straight to the point. "We need to understand what happened with the system yesterday and why the original architect's name was removed from the project documentation." One of the lawyers looked at me with the rehearsed coldness of someone already on the defensive. But Catherine didn't blink. I placed my notebook on the table. I built the core of the AI, started development from scratch, and yes, I included a security protocol to prevent misuse of the technology. It's all documented. These are the records. No threats, no drama. Just facts. For a moment, the room filled with silence. Then one of the lawyers broke it. Did this protocol cause the failure at the event? It was triggered because the system was presented with altered credits and without validation from the original author. I didn't erase anything. I just withheld what was taken from me. Catherine took the papers. She read them silently. Then she said something that broke me from the inside out. "You worked at this company with dignity. The board should have known that from the start." I left the room with a heavy head but a quiet chest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anger. I felt like something, however small, had been set right. I went back to my corner in the office, sat down, took a breath, and began writing a new line of code. That afternoon, I received an email directly from the board. Subject: Request for confidential meeting. You only. The email asked for discretion. A private meeting with 2 board members, after hours, in the executive office suite. No official communication. No formal agenda. Just me and them. The message ended with a line I read twice. "We want to hear your side, in person." I arrived around 7 in the evening. The floor was nearly empty. Most of the staff had already gone home. The air felt different, not tense, but expectant. The room for the meeting was the same one Richard used for investor presentations. Fitting, in a way. The oval table, the windows overlooking the city skyline, the award plaques on the wall, none of which bore my name. I walked in without greeting anyone. They were already there. Catherine Reese gave me a subtle nod. Next to her sat Gregory Meyer, another board member, known for his cold pragmatism. Not the type to waste time with compliments. Catherine was the first to speak. "The system you created is solid. It was sabotaged from within when they tried to reassign credit to someone else. Now the business is at risk of collapse if we don't restore its integrity." Gregory added, "We want to handle this without public exposure. An internal conflict isn't in the company's interest, especially at a time like this." They were trying to contain a fire they had allowed to start. But I didn't want to fight. I never did. I just wanted what was mine to be acknowledged, and to be left alone to do my work. "My condition is simple," I said, looking at both of them. "I want full access to the code, formal technical leadership and decision-making autonomy, and I want my name restored in the project records as the original architect." Gregory took a deep breath, looked over at Catherine. She nodded. "You'll have that, and more. We'll propose your appointment as Chief AI Engineer. You'll report directly to the CTO with full technical authority moving forward." I listened in silence. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like repair, as if, finally, someone had seen that the system hadn't failed. It had simply defended its creator. That night I returned to my old office. No one knew yet, but soon they would. I stayed up all night reviewing the protocol, made adjustments, improved what needed refining, but I left the core structure intact. It had already done its job. Now, it was time to build on top of it. The next morning, Kyle showed up at my office. He looked pale. Richard is gone. Didn't show up today. And apparently he no longer has access to the company email. I nodded but said nothing. He looked at me with a mix of relief and respect. For the first time, I saw something different in his eyes. Recognition. As if now, he finally understood exactly who had built all of it. By midday, the news had spread. Richard had been removed from his position. The board made the decision in an emergency meeting. No official announcement was released, but the message was clear. The company needed room to breathe, and the man who sold facades was no longer part of the plan. I stayed silent through it all, kept working. Didn't say a word. It wasn't the time for speeches. There was still too much to rebuild. The following week, I'd have my first meeting with the entire engineering team, and this time, I'd be the one opening the room. On Thursday, the email arrived with a blunt subject line: urgent, technical clarification request, national defense. It was official. The company's most important client, a government agency negotiating the use of our AI for defense operations, had detected irregularities during a sandbox test. The AI instance had begun to display erratic behavior, refusing to execute certain routines and, in some cases, responding with complete silence. It was a subtle failure, but enough to trigger serious alerts. The email hadn't been sent to me directly. It was addressed to legal and the interim executive team, but it took only 5 minutes before the CTO knocked on my office door. He looked drained. They want an immediate technical briefing. With you. They asked for you by name. I felt the weight of what that meant. For years I worked in the shadows, and now the name they tried to erase was the only thing that could save the business. That afternoon, I entered a video conference with government representatives, military engineers, and 3 members of our board. It was a delicate meeting, not to assign blame, but to understand what had actually been delivered. I showed the logs, explained the system's integrity framework, made it clear the failure wasn't accidental. It was a security measure triggered when they tried to run the project with altered credentials. Not a single line of that protocol was written to sabotage anything. It was written to protect. The colonel on the other end of the screen narrowed his eyes. Then he nodded. The system's integrity was sound. The authorization process wasn't. We ended the call with an unexpected request. They wanted an in-person technical visit. They wanted to meet me. They wanted to understand how we had designed the system. Suddenly, the name that the company nearly buried was now being requested by the most important potential client in our history. The impact was immediate. The next day, a new board meeting was scheduled. Unlike the previous ones, this one was public. The entire engineering team was called in, along with operations and parts of the admin department. The room was packed. People who hadn't made eye contact with me just weeks ago were now sitting in the front row. I stepped onto the stage without much ceremony. The CTO introduced me as the original technical architect of Project Vantage. And for the first time I heard applause. Not applause for show, but for respect. I presented the protection framework, showed the log evolution, explained why it had activated and what was being done to fix it. I spoke calmly. No theatrics. Just laid out what had been there all along. The meeting lasted almost an hour, and at the end, board member Catherine stepped onto the stage, took the microphone and said, "This company nearly made the mistake of ignoring the technical heart of its own creation. We will not repeat that." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't justice, but it was the beginning of something. I returned to the office, the same room they had isolated me in just weeks earlier. I opened my laptop, and there it was. Another email, this time from an address I didn't recognize. Private. From someone important. "Mr. Cole, we are aware of your ethical and technical leadership regarding the Vantage AI case. We'd like to speak with you about a possible independent consultancy." The message was signed by a former board member, someone who had left the company months ago. And now, he wanted me to leave with him. The email was signed by Thomas Gallagher, former board member at Altavance Systems. He had left the company months earlier, following disputes with Richard, a departure that, at the time, was framed as a natural leadership transition. The truth? Gallagher had never bought into the way the company was being run. We met 2 days later, discreetly, at a cafe far from the office. Straight to the point, just like I've always been. Gallagher, too. The way you handled all of this, It was smart, measured. You could have made a scene, but you kept your integrity. That matters. A lot. The conversation was brief. He was building a new consultancy, focused on technical audits for large tech firms. High complexity, sensitive systems, and he needed someone like me. But he didn't make a formal offer. Just planted the idea and left his card. I returned to the office with a full head. I had my position back. I had respect again. I was leading the team, but a part of me knew that place would never be the same, because a place where they let you bleed in silence never truly heals. That same week, Richard reappeared, not in person but through lawyers. He filed a formal request to review the non-compete clause in his exit agreement, the one that barred him from working with competitors for 2 years. He wanted freedom. The intent was clear, to claw back some kind of influence in the market. But then came the unexpected part. The company's legal team called me in for a new meeting. They wanted my technical opinion on a proposal Richard had tried to pitch months earlier, a commercial version of the Vantage AI system, stripped of the safeguards I had built in. I sat in the conference room with 2 lawyers, a board representative, and the CTO. They wanted to know if it was viable, if it was safe. I reviewed the documents carefully. Then I gave my answer, calm and clear. The system he's proposing is a watered-down version. No ethical filters, no autonomy tracking. He wants to use the shell of what we built for something we never approved. If the company allows this, it could be opening itself up to major legal and reputational risks. Silence. They all understood. 2 days later, Richard's request was formally denied. The denial came with a legal notice. The board made it clear, any commercial use based on our original project would now require my approval, and the approval of the team I now lead. That was the moment I understood something. My revenge had already happened. No raised voice, no threats. The company turned the tide for me, because in the end, I was the one piece of the puzzle they could no longer afford to lose. And Richard was finally locked out of the system he had tried to steal. At the office, the change was noticeable. People started coming to me for decisions. They trusted me. Younger employees came by asking for guidance, wanting to learn, and I taught them, patiently, because deep down that's what I'd always wanted, to build something that would last, something that made sense. Then I got another email from Gallagher. This time it was formal. A consulting offer, autonomy, my own project. On my desk there were 2 contracts. One was from the company that had once thrown me away. The other was from the one that wanted to let me build things my way. The choice was mine. For the first time, both contracts were on my desk. One bore the letterhead of Altavance Systems, the company where I had worked, created, been ignored, and finally recognized. The other came from Thomas Gallagher, a new venture, smaller, but with complete freedom to build something from scratch, without the political tethers of boardrooms and bureaucratic meetings. Staying would mean stability, internal recognition, the feeling of having won on the very ground where they once tried to erase me. Leaving would mean autonomy, a chance to work on my own terms, to build without having to justify every line of code to someone who didn't even understand what they were reading. I spent 3 days avoiding the decision, buried myself in the work, or rather, in the project. I restructured much of the system, now with a team that actually listened. The people felt different. They were in a hurry to learn, not just to climb. That gave me hope. Maybe the environment was changing. On Thursday, the CTO asked to speak with me informally. He said the board wanted to keep me at any cost. They even offered a retention bonus. They asked me to take part in more strategic decisions for the company. They even mentioned a possible nomination to the technical board in the coming months. I listened. I thanked him, and I went back to my office. I walked straight to the window, not to admire the view, but to remember the time I used to look at that same skyline with a knot in my stomach. Back then, I was invisible. I worked without a voice, gave everything I had, and still got silenced. That same afternoon, Kyle, now leading one of the development teams, stepped into my office with a hesitant smile. "Have you decided if you're staying?" I didn't answer. He went on, "If you leave, I get it. But things feel different here because you stayed, not because Richard left. Just thought you should know." Those words weighed more than any clause in any contract. Later that night, I reviewed Gallagher's offer again. The paper still smelled new. No approval committees. No ego filters. Just the chance to build something based on actual knowledge without having to sell the concept in endless meetings. But then, I opened an old notebook, the one where I'd scribbled the earliest sketches of the project, where in the corner of one page I had written, "If you're going to build something, let it be with truth." I sat on the floor of the office. The lights were already off. Only the glow of the monitor lit the room. I held both contracts in my hands, read through each one slowly, measured the pros, the risks, the history, the wounds, the possible new beginnings. Staying would mean showing that a place could be changed from the inside. Leaving would mean walking away and starting fresh. Both came with a kind of justice. Both demanded courage. In the end, I made a choice, and I signed. But what happened the next morning? Changed everything again. The next morning, I left the sealed envelope on the legal department's desk. No ceremony, just a signature. I stayed at Altavance, but not out of loyalty to the company. I stayed for the team. I stayed because I realized something. Sometimes, the place where you were erased can also be the place where you help others shine. The board accepted every condition. From that day forward, I would formally lead the Artificial Intelligence Division, a new independent technical unit with veto power over any strategic changes to the project. And more than that, I was granted full autonomy to create an internal program protecting the intellectual and technical rights of our engineering staff. Yes, I had spent years working in the dark, but now I could make sure no one else's work would ever be stolen the way mine was. That was my invisible contract. The first thing I did was reinstall the system's original framework, with the ethical layers Richard had ordered removed months earlier. No one objected. The board trusted me, not because I gave a good speech, but because they saw what happened when they tried to move forward without me. Leadership isn't about standing on a stage. It's about protecting the ones building on the ground. 2 months later, Gallagher messaged me. He wanted to meet for coffee. Said he respected my decision. You stayed. You fixed it from the inside. That has more impact than people realize. I just replied, it was what needed to be done. In the new office, I took down the old award plaques and hung something else. The original draft of the algorithm, the very first page, with my crooked handwriting and the project name written in blue ink. People call me a leader now, but I'm still an engineer. I still come in early. I still review code carefully. The difference is now when someone brings a good idea, I make sure to write down their name. Because no one forgets what it's like to be forgotten. At the last quarterly board meeting, we presented the system's growth after the adjustments. One of the board members joked, "Nice crisis recovery, Mr. Cole." I gave a small smile, didn't answer, but inside I thought, it wasn't recovery, it was repair. And you? Have you ever had something stolen and had to prove your worth in silence?